Notes from the Edge. War, Psychosis, and the Search for God. A true story. I was born in 1975, the third of four children in a home shaped by faith and tradition. My childhood was painted with the quiet rhythm of Sunday mornings. Polished shoes, brushed hair, and the familiar hum of hymns as we filed into our local church. We were a mostly Christian family, with faith not just spoken of, but lived. Our parents believed in structure, in moral foundation, in the kind of upbringing where God was part of every meal, every decision, every milestone. I was christened as a baby, too young to remember the water on my forehead, but old enough by my early teens to understand the weight of my baptism. That moment felt like a rite of passage, a personal commitment that aligned with the teachings I'd absorbed over the years in Sunday school and youth group. There was no question then of belief. It was part of the air I breathed. I prayed earnestly, sang loudly, and even dreamt of becoming someone who served the church. Looking back, I was genuinely religious, not out of fear, not yet, but out of a heartfelt connection to something bigger than myself. One Sunday when I was 15, the course of my spiritual life shifted dramatically. We were seated in the same wooden pews under the same arched ceiling, filtered light casting stained glass patterns on the floor. Everything felt routine, until the pastor's sermon took a turn. He raised his voice, jabbing the air with conviction. "You must do as I say, or you will burn in hell for eternity. The Bible demands it." The words hit me like a slap. There was a fire in his tone, not one that warmed or inspired, but scorched. I remember sitting there, completely stunned, my stomach churning. I wasn't defiant, not in the rebellious teenage sense. This was different. I was someone who had always tried to do right, to believe. But in that moment, what I heard wasn't the loving guidance of a shepherd. It was a threat masked as theology, an ultimatum. My young mind, already wrestling with independence and authority, recoiled. It felt less like religion and more like control, an adult using ancient texts to bend people to his will. I didn't feel grace in that message. I felt fear, and it broke something inside me. I walked out of church that day knowing I wouldn't return, not because I stopped believing in God, but because I stopped believing in that version of Him. In the years that followed, I buried myself in the clarity and comfort of logic. Science became my new sanctuary, its empirical methods and observable truths a welcome contrast to the fear-driven sermons of my youth. It wasn't that I had found all the answers. I simply chose to believe that if something couldn't be explained yet, it was only because science hadn't caught up. It was a cleaner faith, unburdened by guilt or fire and brimstone. By the time I left school, I had no interest in revisiting religion. Instead, I focused on building a practical future. I took up an apprenticeship as a printing machinist, a trade rooted in precision, in process, in results you could see and touch. After 4 years, I was a qualified tradesman. It was the mid-90s then, and the world around me was shifting. Grunge was the anthem of a generation, raw, messy, emotional, and I found comfort in its chaos. I moved to Sydney and lived with a group of mates in a rundown share house. Our days blended into nights filled with loud music, cheap beer, and the thrum of live gigs in dark, sweaty pubs. It was a kind of freedom, or at least a defiant escape from the dogma I had rejected. Looking back, I wasn't searching for meaning. I was running from it. At 24, I did something no one, least of all me, saw coming. I joined the Air Force. To those around me, it was baffling. I'd been living a wild, unpredictable existence, flitting between warehouse parties and pub gigs, riding the tide of my impulses. Discipline and structure weren't exactly words anyone associated with me. But deep down, I think there was something unresolved in me. a quiet yearning for order, for a sense of purpose I couldn't find in the noise of the city or the bottom of a beer bottle. In hindsight, I suspect it was my undiagnosed ADHD pushing me toward a system that could contain the chaos. Something about the rigid routine, the expectations, the clarity of roles. It gave my mind something to grasp. What surprised me most was how quickly I adapted. I didn't just survive military life, I excelled in it. I threw myself into every challenge, every training session, every mission. I rose through the ranks in the first decade, eventually earning a commission as an intelligence officer. From there, I would go on to serve another 13 years. Years filled with meaning, order, and the kind of camaraderie I never found in any band or bar. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Over the span of my military career, I deployed to 4 separate war zones. Each one left a different mark, on the world, on the people I served with, and on me. War has a way of stripping life down to its rawest elements: survival, duty, fear, and at times, shame. I witnessed things I can't unsee: devastation, loss, destruction carried out by human hands, including my own. That's the truth that few speak out loud. In those moments, you do what you must. You rely on training, on orders, on the belief that your actions serve a higher purpose. We told ourselves the same line over and over. If we don't do it, someone else will. Someone less capable, less precise. Then more innocent lives might be lost. It was a script we leaned on to make sense of the insanity. And maybe it was true, maybe not. But we had to believe it to make it through. The problem is, when the missions are over and the dust settles, those justifications don't always follow you home. They get stuck somewhere in the desert or in the alleyways of foreign cities. Back home, silence creeps in, and so does guilt. I struggled with that silence. It kept me awake, hollowed me out. In the end, it wasn't valor or strength that helped me sleep. It was antidepressants. They numbed just enough of the pain to keep me functioning, but they never erased the memories. It was a Monday morning in January. Unremarkable at first, one of those routine days where you show up, take your seat, and prepare for the usual slide deck presentation. The briefing room was filled with familiar faces, colleagues in uniform, each of us hardened by years of service, yet outwardly composed. That morning's topic was psychological well-being and mental health support, a subject I had dealt with countless times before. As the executive officer of the unit, I'd been the go-to person for managing crisis cases, checking in on struggling personnel, and ensuring protocols were followed. I knew the language. I knew the policies. I thought I understood the signs. But as the speaker calmly listed support systems, counseling services, and wellness programs, something shifted in me. It came out of nowhere. One moment I was listening, nodding slightly, and the next, I felt a surge I can only describe as electric. Something unnatural and overwhelming that tore through my head like a violent current. It was like a short circuit in my brain, and in that instant, the world around me dimmed. I didn't know it at the time, but this was the moment everything would change. The sensation was like nothing I'd ever experienced. A violent jolt of electricity surged through my skull, stopping me mid-thought. It was instantaneous and absolute. My entire body jolted, and before I could process what had happened, everything went black. Not just dim, completely dark. It was as if someone had unplugged my vision from the world. My head rang with a high, piercing frequency, like the aftermath of a bomb detonating too close. Panic set in as I blinked hard, willing my sight to return. Slowly, shadows formed and then shapes, but I could barely make out the speaker who was still talking as if nothing had happened. My body reacted violently. Sweat poured from my temples, soaking through my uniform. I was dizzy, nauseous, unmoored. And underneath all of it, a visceral urgency pulsed through me. Leave. Now. I didn't know why, but it wasn't up for debate. I leaned toward my commanding officer, barely able to form the words. I'm sorry, sir, but I need to leave. Whatever he saw in my face, it was enough. His eyes softened and he gave me the quiet go-ahead. Go, mate. That was it. I stood, walked out, and crossed a threshold I didn't fully understand. I didn't know what was happening to me. I only knew that something inside me had ruptured, and I would never walk through that unit's doors again. The months that followed were a blur of medical paperwork, confusion, and escalating symptoms. What began as a single, terrifying episode turned into a daily barrage. Irregular, inexplicable, and completely debilitating. I began experiencing what I called brain zaps, sharp, sudden bursts of pain and electricity that seemed to pulse from within my skull, usually around the temples and behind the eyes. They came without warning. Sometimes it was early morning. Other times in the middle of a conversation. It was as if something was flicking a switch in my nervous system, overriding control. The military, which had once offered me order and clarity, no longer had a place for me. After 10 long months of uncertainty, I was medically discharged due to deteriorating mental health. That decision, though inevitable, was hard to accept. I still didn't fully understand what was happening to me, and neither did the professionals I turned to. One psychiatrist, the first of many, tried to explain that the brain itself can't feel pain. There's no nerve endings, he said with finality, dismissing my description out of hand. That's why brain surgery can be done while a patient is awake. But his logic offered no comfort. Whatever was happening, I was feeling something, deep, acute, and real. Whether the pain originated in my brain or somewhere else didn't matter to me. I only knew the zaps were persistent, and they were wrecking my life. I clung to the term I'd coined, brain zaps, because giving it a name, even one they didn't accept, gave me a sliver of control. After leaving the Air Force, things spiraled quickly. I had lost the rigid structure that once anchored me, and with it, any sense of normalcy. The brain zaps intensified, more frequent, more violent, and completely unpredictable. I started to feel like a lab rat, like something was being done to me, not just happening inside me. The only explanation that made sense in my fractured reality was this: the military was behind it. I became convinced it was some kind of experimental tech, a weapon, or a psychological operation. Maybe it was a punishment, maybe a test. I didn't know. But I was sure of one thing. I was being targeted. When I was finally admitted to the mental health ward, my suspicions went into overdrive. The sterile hallways and neutral smiles of the doctors only fueled my paranoia. I challenged them. "Who do you really work for?" I asked. I didn't believe their reassurances. The paranoia widened like a crack in glass. The police who had come to check on me? Military. The ambulance crew? Infiltrated. Even my friends and family, especially my family, I believed they were all actors in a cruel game. My mind raced for reasons, for motives, for meaning. Why me? Why won't it stop? The zaps felt intelligent, like they responded to my thoughts, like they were orchestrated. And as the world narrowed in around me, I was drowning in mistrust, trapped in a reality that no one else could see, but that I was absolutely convinced was real. Eventually, the doctors gave it a name: paranoid schizophrenia. To them, the pieces fit: the delusions, the conspiracies, the intense distrust of everyone around me. They started me on antipsychotic medication almost immediately, Their clinical approach swift and absolute. In the sterile calm of the hospital, I swallowed those pills each day, hoping they'd offer some reprieve, some stillness. I tried to accept the diagnosis. Maybe I was mad. Maybe everything I believed was the product of a broken mind. It was a hard pill to swallow, figuratively and literally. 14 days later, I was discharged, sent back into the world with a packet of meds and a hollow sense of confusion. But the truth, the part I didn't share out loud, was this. The brain zaps never stopped. Even under medication, even surrounded by professionals who insisted I was stabilizing, I continued to feel them. Sometimes they were subtle, other times violent. They didn't care what the doctors called them. They didn't care if I believed or doubted. They just kept coming. In some ways, it was worse now. I had a label, a diagnosis, but no explanation. And deep down, I still couldn't shake the feeling that something else, something real, was going on. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in Canberra, a modest space tucked into a quiet part of town. It was meant to be a fresh start, a blank slate. For a little while, it felt that way. I bought some furniture, hung up some art, tried to create a routine. There was comfort in the solitude, at least at first. But the silence quickly became too loud. The brain zaps continued with renewed force, as if they had been waiting for me to let my guard down. They came at odd moments, while boiling the kettle, watching TV, scrolling through my phone. I started to see patterns where none should be. News programs, radio broadcasts, even printed headlines seemed laced with hidden meanings. The anchors weren't just reporting, they were communicating to me. Everything was coded. Everything needed deciphering. I was still on antipsychotics and antidepressants, religiously taking the meds prescribed to keep my mind tethered to reality. But they weren't working. If anything, I felt more untethered than ever. I was spiraling, the lines between fiction and fact blurring until everything was suspect. I wasn't just paranoid, I was desperate. I felt like a man trapped inside a broken receiver, picking up frequencies from a world no one else could hear. I didn't know who was behind it. God? The government? Something else entirely? I only knew one thing for sure. Someone was in my head, and I was losing the ability to tell what was real. The second hospitalization came after I hit what I can only describe as a spiritual and psychological abyss. It was 3 a.m., the loneliest hour of the night, when the brain zaps reached a new intensity, relentless and invasive. It felt like my skull was a radio tower, hijacked by a signal I couldn't escape. My thoughts spiraled in every direction. The CIA was manipulating me. God was punishing me. Aliens were testing me. Every explanation felt equally plausible in the madness. I couldn't stop crying. Guttural, soul-breaking sobs that echoed through the silence of my tiny apartment. I dropped to the floor at one point, holding my head, rocking, begging for the zaps to stop. Then something inside me snapped. I stood up and walked to the balcony, tears still streaming, convinced that the only way to silence it all was to jump. But just as my hands touched the railing, something broke through the noise. A voice, my voice, but clearer than anything else around me, said, "Call 000 just once. Try it." It was a strange moment of clarity, like a beam of light through thick fog. I turned, walked back inside, and shakily dialed. The operator didn't hesitate. Within minutes, paramedics were at my door. They didn't ask for details, they just helped. And for a moment, I felt saved. Not healed, not better, but pulled back from the edge. Just in time. The hospital was quiet, sterile, and cold the way only psychiatric wards can be. Clean, but drained of soul. I spent a week there, surrounded by white walls, ticking clocks, and the distant murmur of other patients. But my mind was anything but quiet. I questioned everything, every thought, every feeling, every memory. The zaps didn't stop, and neither did the paranoia. Who was in my head? The questions circled endlessly. I tried to reason with it, to map out a logic that made sense of the chaos. Was it a person? A machine? A presence? The one thing I became sure of was that whoever or whatever it was, they didn't want me speaking out. That became my reality. Every time I thought about telling someone, truly telling them, the zaps would intensify, like a warning shot. So I stayed silent. I smiled when I needed to, nodded when asked if I was feeling better, and played the part of someone ready for release. Deep down, I just wanted out. I needed to return to a world where I could at least pretend to be normal. So after 6 days, the doctors, seeing a stable patient, signed the discharge forms. They never knew the truth, and I didn't tell them. I walked out of the hospital not healed, but hidden. Not long after my release, I found myself sitting alone at my computer, the screen casting a pale glow over a cluttered desk. I was stuck, paralyzed by the unknowns of what came next. The question repeated in my head: how do I survive like this? I felt as though I was living in two worlds at once, one that others saw and one only I experienced. As I sat in that mental fog, a thought drifted in. My family. Tasmania. It came quietly, like a memory or a whisper. Zap. A sharp pulse hit me, more focused than usual. I flinched. I dismissed it as coincidence, until I had the thought again. I could go see them. Zap. Another jolt, not as painful this time, but unmistakably there. Curiosity kicked in. I opened a browser and typed in flight details. Zap. The moment I scrolled to the flight options, it happened again. That's when I saw it. A discounted one-way flight leaving that same afternoon. The timing felt too perfect, the sequence of events too aligned. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being guided. Call it paranoia or divine intervention, but I knew what I had to do. I booked the ticket without hesitation, packed a single bag, and walked out of my apartment without looking back. I didn't say goodbye to Canberra. I didn't need to. In my mind, that chapter was over. I was going to Tasmania. I didn't know what I'd find there, only that I was meant to go. Back in Tasmania, I found refuge at my parents' home. Familiar walls, familiar smells, the comfort of people who had known me before the uniform, before the war zones, before the zaps. It was grounding in a way I hadn't felt in years. I would sit quietly on the back porch, listen to the birds, watch the wind moving through the trees, and try to make sense of everything that had happened. Over time, the idea began to form that maybe, just maybe, something greater had led me here. It wasn't just chance. The signs, the timing, even the zaps. What if it had all been some kind of guidance? Whether it was the universe, God, or some higher entity, I couldn't ignore the possibility that I had been nudged back onto a path I was meant to walk. That realization stirred something in me that had long been dormant. Faith. I hadn't stepped inside a church for 33 years, not since I was 15. But now, older, broken open by experience, I felt ready to try again. I attended a local service, quietly hopeful. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe I'd find peace. But within 10 minutes of the sermon, the pastor's booming voice echoed through the church. "You must do as I say, or you will burn in hell for eternity. The Bible demands it." The words hit me like a cold wave. My stomach turned. All the old memories came rushing back. The fear, the control, the conditional love. Nope, I thought, standing just as quietly as I had sat. This isn't it. This isn't what I'm looking for. I walked out, once again choosing to seek God elsewhere. The third time I was admitted to hospital came after one of the darkest and most desperate moments of my life. I was living in Launceston by then, and the brain zaps had become so unbearable, so constant, that I began to believe the medication was the root cause. Despite what every doctor warned, I made the decision to stop all my pills, cold turkey, antidepressants, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, all of them. I lasted 2 days. What followed was an emotional implosion. My body buckled under the withdrawal, but even more crushing was the mental collapse. The zaps were relentless, louder, and more aggressive than ever, and I felt like I was being attacked from the inside out. That night, I broke. I cried out to God, not in reverence, but in agony. Take me, make it stop, please just take me now. My voice became a scream, raw and guttural. I shouted for over an hour, each word a plea, a protest, a surrender. My parents stood nearby, their faces a mixture of heartbreak and helplessness. They couldn't soothe me. No one could. When the ambulance finally arrived, I was almost relieved. I knew that this time I wouldn't hold anything back. The doctors, the nurses, whoever would listen. I was going to tell them everything. The military, the CIA, God, the zaps, the patterns, the voices in the static. I didn't care what they thought of me anymore. I just needed someone to hear the full story. Because whether it was madness or something else, I couldn't carry it alone any longer. I laid everything bare to the hospital staff. Every theory, every pattern, every fear. I told them about the zaps, the messages, the signals I believed were being sent directly into my mind. I explained that I hadn't come off the meds slowly. I had stopped everything all at once because I had to know if the medication was the source. I told them I believed the zaps weren't just neurological glitches or side effects. They were intelligent, responsive, intentional. I was animated, sincere, even joking at times in my desperation to be understood. Maybe this is something new, I said with a laugh that barely disguised my pain. You could study me, discover a new disorder, I'll make you famous. I hoped someone would crack a smile, show a flicker of curiosity, anything to suggest they were really listening. But they didn't believe me. Not a word. Their faces were calm, blank, trained. They spoke in soft tones and took diligent notes, but their eyes told me I was just another delusional patient in crisis. I knew brain zaps were known to happen when people stopped taking antidepressants. That wasn't news to me. But I wasn't stopping. I had been on the maximum dose consistently, and the zaps still came. Intensely, consistently, and with eerie precision. I wasn't talking about withdrawal. I was talking about something different. Something no one seemed willing to entertain, let alone investigate. And that made the loneliness even worse. The medical team ran every test they had at their disposal. CT scans, EEGs, blood panels. I was willing, cooperative, eager even. I wanted answers just as much as they did. But every time they connected the wires, turned on the machines, and told me to lie still, the zaps would stop. Completely. As if whatever force was behind them had gone into hiding the moment someone tried to look. The silence in my head during those tests wasn't a relief. It was infuriating. It felt staged, like I was being sabotaged by something I couldn't name. When the EEG results came back clean and the CT scan showed nothing abnormal, I felt my last hope slipping away. Without proof, I was just another psychiatric case. After several days of failed tests and shrugged shoulders, I gave in. I sat across from a doctor and said, "Fine, you win. Can you at least stop the brain zaps from happening?" He nodded, almost too quickly, and said, "Absolutely." There was no discussion, just an adjustment in my medication chart. More antipsychotics, stronger doses. Their solution was simple: mute the mind. To them, the absence of evidence was evidence of absence. But to me, it was just another way of being silenced. 10 days later, I walked out of the hospital with a prescription in my pocket and a numbness in my chest. Not the peaceful kind. This was resignation. The doctor said I was stable, that the medication seemed to be working. I had played the part, nodded at the right moments, kept my episodes contained. It was enough to convince them I was well enough to leave. But the truth? The brain zaps hadn't stopped. Not even close. They were still there, flaring up in quiet moments, pulsing in response to certain thoughts or words. If anything, they had just become more familiar, less shocking, but no less intrusive. I didn't tell anyone. What was the point? I had already been labeled, filed, and processed. I realized then that if I was going to survive this, it wouldn't be because someone in a white coat figured it out. It would be because I found a way to live with it. The system had nothing left to offer me but pills and a clipboard. So I walked out of that hospital into a world that hadn't changed, except now I knew. I was on my own. 3 years passed, and in that time, I sat across from 7 different psychiatrists, 7 different experts, 7 sets of credentials, 7 variations of the same furrowed brow. 6 of them listened politely, then gently redirected the conversation back to medication, to therapy, to coping strategies. None believed me. Not really. They saw delusion, not disruption, hallucination, not experience. But the 7th, the one I see now, was different. He didn't flinch when I described the brain zaps. He didn't argue when I said they felt intelligent. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and said something I'll never forget. There are more strange phenomena in my job than I'm able to explain. Just like that, he gave me permission to exist without needing to be fully understood. He told me the trick was to keep living. Don't let it stop you from doing what you want or need to do, he said. Find peace with it. Work together. It was the first time a medical professional didn't try to erase my experience. He acknowledged it, even if he couldn't define it. He gave me a new diagnosis, bipolar disorder, and started me on a different mood stabilizer. I wasn't sure it would help, but for the first time, I felt like someone was actually with me in this, not just trying to fix me. And that made all the difference. Roughly a week or 2 after beginning the new medication, something shifted. The brain zaps didn't vanish, not by a long shot, but they changed. They softened. What had once felt like electric punches now resembled taps. Still frequent, still strange, but no longer incapacitating. For the first time in years, I had space to think without flinching. It was as if the storm had calmed just enough for me to poke my head above water and breathe. That breathing room was everything. It allowed me to start reconnecting with others and with myself. I began to hold conversations again, not just go through the motions. I could sit with thoughts, emotions, and memories without being ambushed by pain or paranoia. But the question, the one that had haunted me through every hospital visit and lonely night, was still there. Who is in my head? It pulsed quietly beneath the surface of every good day, every moment of peace. The zaps had always felt connected to something, someone. The timing, the responses, the awareness in them. Who is it? Who is it? It played like a loop in my head. I didn't know if I was speaking to God, a presence, or some unknown part of my own consciousness, but I needed to understand. Because if I could understand the who, maybe I could begin to understand the why. One quiet afternoon, I sat alone, weighed down by a restlessness I couldn't shake. I reached for my headphones almost instinctively, craving a moment of escape. Music had always been my safe haven, a place where sound could speak the words my heart never could. Without thinking much about it, I opened YouTube and clicked play all on a random playlist. I didn't bother checking what songs were queued up. It didn't matter. I just needed noise to drown out the endless questions that rattled inside my head. As the first track began to roll out its opening notes, I barely had time to settle back into my chair before it happened. Zap! A massive jolt, so sharp it made me flinch physically, synchronized perfectly with the first line of the song. Don't ask me what you know is true. I froze, mid-breath. My fingers tightened around the arms of the chair. The zap hadn't just punctuated the music. It had pointed straight to that lyric, carving it into my mind. Don't ask me what you know is true. The weight of those words fell heavy on my chest. It wasn't just the timing, or even the impact. It was the unmistakable feeling of being directly addressed. It felt targeted, like a private message hidden inside a public song. A secret whispered through the speakers only I could hear. I sat there absolutely still, every nerve in my body on high alert, as if waiting for something more. That line echoed long after the music moved on. I knew, deep down, that whatever was happening wasn't random. It was deliberate. It was intimate. It was answering the question I had whispered into the void for years. Who is in my head? I didn't dare move for the rest of that song. My body was rigid, locked between awe and terror. My mind raced in circles. Was this real? Was this coincidence? Could this really be something more? Before I could find an answer, the next song started. Billy Joel's Just the Way You Are. A familiar tune, soft and reassuring, the kind of song that usually brought comfort. But this time, I barely made it through the opening chords when zap, another one. Sharp, insistent, maybe even stronger than the first. It slammed into me at the exact moment Joel's voice poured through the headphones. What will it take till you believe in me, the way that I believe in you? I sucked in a shaky breath. My skin prickled. My heart raced. What will it take till you believe in me, the way that I believe in you? The words hung in the air like a direct challenge, almost pleading. This wasn't a love song anymore. It was a confrontation, a demand. It felt as though someone, or something, was trying desperately to break through my disbelief. The zaps weren't random discharges of electricity. They were exclamation points, urgencies, the way someone might grab your arm and say, "Listen to me, I'm serious." My hands shook. My chest tightened. I realized I was hearing something I could no longer dismiss. Whether it was from my mind or beyond it, I was being spoken to. And in that moment, I made a silent vow. I would listen. Then came the third song, Human by Rag and Bone Man. I barely even noticed the beginning. My head was still spinning from what had already happened. But deep inside, I braced myself. I knew something was coming. And sure enough, it did. Zap. Another jolt, perfectly timed, sharp as a blade. And then the lyric cut through. I'm no prophet or messiah. I gasped. 3 songs, 3 flawless zaps, 3 messages that pierced straight into the heart of everything I had been wrestling with. Am I crazy? Am I chosen? Am I both? I sat there, headphones still pressed against my ears, while the room around me seemed to pulse with a charged, unseen energy. Waves of chills rippled over my skin. I could barely breathe. The world felt too small to contain the enormity of what was happening. Desperate to steady myself, I tore off the headphones and stumbled out of the room, needing to move, needing air. I made it downstairs, my body still trembling, when the television caught my attention mid-stride. From the lounge room, a loud voice shouted, "That's a prophet!" I stopped dead in my tracks, turned, stunned. Did I just hear that? I stared at the screen. It was an episode of Bargain Hunt, a show about antiques. The subtitles flashed. "That's a prophet," referring to the value of some trinket. But it didn't matter. I knew what I heard. That's a prophet. It wasn't the words that mattered. It was the timing, the context, the cascade of synchronicities impossible to deny. It was as if the universe itself had picked up a megaphone and shouted across dimensions, "Are you paying attention now?" Whether it was hallucination, divine communication, or some strange alignment of perception, it no longer mattered. In that moment, I understood one thing clearly. Whoever or whatever was reaching out to me had found a way to break through. I sat in that living room for what felt like hours, though I couldn't have told you how much time actually passed. My body remained perfectly still, but inside, my mind was a cyclone. I replayed everything: the zaps, the songs, the perfectly timed lyrics, the impossible coincidence of the voice on the television. It was too much, too orchestrated to dismiss as random. Every logical fiber in me wanted to categorize it as coincidence, a misfiring brain, a hallucination. But somewhere deeper, beyond logic, I knew. This was real. I wasn't afraid, not anymore. I was captivated. It felt like, in the chaos of my unraveling mind, I had somehow stumbled upon a thread of something pure and deliberate. Something alive. The realization reshaped how I saw the zaps. For years, they had been the enemy. Violent intrusions that disrupted my life, mocked my sanity, and isolated me from the world. But now, sitting there in the aftermath of those messages, they didn't feel like punishments anymore. They felt like signals, communications, a language of electric touch that spoke directly to something deeper than hearing or sight. I realized they had softened over the years, growing less violent, more rhythmic, almost considerate in their timing. They weren't destroying me. They were shaping me. They were never random. They were cues, prompts, nudging me to slow down, to listen, to notice. And so, for the first time in a long time, I chose to stop fighting. I chose to listen. In that spirit of listening, I found myself drawn back to church. Not out of fear, not because some booming voice threatened me with fire and brimstone, but because something within me was pulling me back toward faith. This was different from the blind acceptance of my youth, and certainly different from the angry rejection of my teenage years. This time, it was curiosity. It was reverence. I wasn't searching for a religion to save me. I was searching for a way to meet the force that had touched me. I wouldn't say I belong to any one faith, not yet. But I can say this without hesitation. I now have my own personal proof that God exists, that there is far more to our world than what we can see and touch. However, I'm unable to show that proof, not in any scientific way. And therein lies the dilemma. What proof can you offer when your entire experience unfolds in the unseen? What evidence do you show when the signs are stitched into your thoughts, your senses, your very wiring? You can't bring a doctor's scan or a photograph to the table. All you have are your words and the trembling conviction behind them. Maybe the brain zaps were divine messengers all along, ancient, misunderstood, now reduced to symptoms in a psychiatric handbook. Maybe they always were. Maybe they always will be. I often sit and wonder about others, the ones labeled schizophrenic, bipolar, delusional. I wonder how many of them aren't broken at all, but intercepted, reached out to by something vast and unnamed? Could it be that we, in our fear and need for control, have mistaken spiritual encounters for mental illness? Could it be that science hasn't disproved religion, but simply walled it off, treating the unknowable as pathology rather than mystery? Sometimes I think my daily cocktail of antipsychotics, antidepressants, stimulants, and mood stabilizers isn't saving me. It's shielding me from a force too immense for my raw humanity to endure. Or maybe that's just the story I tell myself so I can sleep at night. I don't know. I only know what I've lived, and whether it's all divine contact or simply the misfiring of a damaged brain, I'll probably never know for sure. But I do know this. If it is all in my head, then my head has been touched by something extraordinary, something that changed me forever. And unless you've walked this razor-thin line yourself, balancing between faith and madness, you'll have to take my lack of evidence on faith.